I'm probably just going to have a small little release party with friends and family or something, have a drink to celebrate.
Welcome to the show. I'm JasonShannon, author of the books The Zimmer Insurgency, The Hounds of Harajan, and Tiger Blues. This is a podcast about indie writing, featuring excerpts, sample chapters, short stories, upcoming news, and interviews with a variety of other indie authors. GerritVan Eck grew up in Belleville, Ontario, where a childhood spent reading any books he could get his hands on evolved into a passion for creating stories. A love of all things fantasy led him to series like Lord of the Rings and the Pendragon adventures. Eventually, he decided to stop imagining the stories and actually put pen to paper. Today we are discussing Gerrit's fantasy novella, The Reluctant Blade, Book 1 of his Sparrows Trilogy. The Reluctant Blade follows a young woman named Serenia as she's forced to flee her father's noble estate and becomes penniless in the metropolitan city of Ruddreth, where she soon falls in with a secret society of pickpockets. Book 2 of the Sparrows Trilogy, The Dulled Edge, releases August 14th. All right, and now I give you GerritVan Eck. I was very much getting like Renaissance Italy, Italian city-state vibes from your book. Am I close to the mark on that, or am I way off?
Yeah, that was pretty close to what I was going for. When I started writing it, I knew I wanted kind of Renaissance-y sort of vibes. I didn't know what kind of setting other than that I was going for, but as I was writing it, it ended up taking a lot of the, like you said, the sort of city-state Italian sort of vibes, and I found myself really enjoying those, so I ended up just rolling with it and working with them as much as I could.
Yeah, I think it worked really well for you. Like I was, especially with the sort of secret society of thieves you've got going on there. It just seemed to fit in there really nicely, where it's kind of modernizing past feudalism a little bit, but it's still very much like pre-modern and it, just on the cusp of where modernity can come in.
Yeah, it felt like the right vibe for the kind of plot and characters I was trying to build with it.
When you approach writing a book, do you have a sort of idea as to like this is the time period that I want to go with, or is it just you start writing with a character and it comes out that way?
Sometimes, more often than not, I think I have a general time period idea, but there's been plenty of times in the past also where I've been working on something, whether it be a short story or a longer project, where I go into it with a specific time period in mind, and then as I get sort of partway through, I realize, actually, you know what, it would make more sense if the technology is more advanced or less advanced or what have you. But overall, I think I generally have a pretty good idea of the time period I'm working with. It's everything else that I tend to not know ahead of time.
Everything else as like the plot, the characters, or what do you mean by that?
Uh, a lot of times, yeah. So generally, I'll have like the main character, maybe a couple side characters, and a lot of the rest of it just kind of gets figured out as I go. I'm very much a pantser or like an on the fly writer. So I start out with a very sort of skeletal structure, and a lot of it comes to me as I'm going along, or I get to a point in the plot and I think, well, this problem would be best solved with this, so maybe I'll write that into the setting.
Yeah, that's interesting. That was going to be one of the questions I had for later on. But just sticking with the sort of building in your time period, um, has there been times before, or maybe you haven't hit this yet, where you start writing and you're like what you were saying about levels of technology, and like, I really need this to either be dialed forward or dialed back, and it's had to be changed on you?
Nothing too significant, thankfully. A lot of times it's just, you know, not necessarily historical accuracy, because in a fantasy book, I don't have to worry about that too much. But to some extent, I want it to be believable. So I'll often look at, okay, this is the kind of thing that I need. What technology in that realm existed at this time, and can I work with what there was, or do I need to make up my own solution, or maybe I need to progress things a bit so I can get this next invention into the plot or something like that.
And you're also working with like a magic system in here. Your main character Serenia, which is a Great name for a main character, by the way.
Thank
But
you.
she has like I guess magic is kind of banned or discriminated against in here, and she's kind of blessed with it or cursed with it from sort of her lineage. Um, what goes into sort of planning out what the magic will be? How detailed do you plan on getting with that versus, how much of a sort of eagle eye view do you take?
So a lot of times the magic system tends to be one of the first things that I come up with just because I'm always coming up with fun magic ideas and then trying to find stories that I can come up with to, show those off. Um, so I don't go into it super deeply. Um, I know some people really love a hard magic system, but for me, I think a lot of the fun is in not knowing all the details, sort of playing the cards close to my chest almost in a way where I can tease little things and reveal them later and not worry about, like, the hard and fast rules of does this fit and does this work or that sort of thing. I find it's a lot more fun to be able to just be like, you know what, it's magic. There's some basic rules that we understand, but a lot of it is still beyond our sort of common knowledge.
Yeah, I very much prefer that in fantasy as well. I've read a few books that get really detailed into like the mechanics of this, and this spell only works if you do X, Y, and Z. And it's a little bit like, my background is science fiction, and I don't need to know like the entire interior layout of the spaceship. I just need to know that it's a spaceship and it travels, intergalactic or interstellar or whatever. And it's more about the characters as they are navigating through this rather than the mechanics of how it all works. So I very much prefer reading that as well. And I think it gives you more freedom in terms of as the series goes on. If you're like, well, I didn't set up any hard rules in the beginning that I now need to break to make this plot point work.
Exactly, right. It gives me a lot more leeway, so I'm less likely to write myself into a corner later on. And I find, obviously if the to me at least, if the plot is going to be centered around the magic itself, you'll need to have some sort of rules so that, readers will understand what's going on. But I think with more character driven stories, which is what I try to go for, you can get away with the magic being sort of almost fast and loose in a sense because you're not here for the magic, you're here for the characters. The magic is just a fun little thing that you get to experience along the way.
For sure. And I've always appreciated like strong character work rather than just the world or the overall setting or anything that they're in. Because without characters and like the real human experience, you don't have much of a story.
Exactly.
Now we mentioned that this is part of a series. You've got book two coming out in just a little bit here, which we'll get to in just a second. But with book one, you started at pretty much like novella length. It was like 120 some pages. Was that always planned from the beginning to have this sort of, I don't want to say sampler, but kind of a shorter work to draw people in?
Yeah, so originally I set out and I wanted to write a novel, not in this setting. Yeah. It was a completely different world, characters, all different stuff, and I was just having trouble with it. I worked on it for a few years, stuff wasn't lining up, pacing felt wrong. So eventually I just decided, the best thing I can do is walk away from it, work on something else, and I thought that novellas might be something that I can use to maybe get more of a feel for it. I had grown up writing a lot of short stories, and I think trying to jump from short stories to novels was just too much of a jump at that point. And so I figured a novella might be a good way to sort of meet in the middle, get a better handle on pacing and plot structure. And I figured if I can get it down pat and get a concise story in under 40,000 words, then that should be easier to sort of extrapolate into a full length novel where there's multiple POVs and more things happening.
That's really good advice for anyone who is kind of just starting out on their writing journey. That I guess it didn't really apply to me too much, but I've heard many other people kind of describe the same thing you're describing there, where with a novel, you're having subplots to deal with, you're having multiple perspectives, you're having different, you know, side quests to go on. And not always the easiest to stitch all that in and still have it flow nicely. Alan Steele, one of my favorite authors, has said in some interview somewhere that he loves writing novellas because there's no subplots and you can literally just start with the problem and follow it straight through to the finish. And that is, if you're an author out there struggling to put your story together, work on novella length and just do that. Just go from straight A to B and have that be your book.
Yeah, exactly. Like I find it's in certain ways like that, it's a lot easier, right? Because it's nine times out of ten, it's one perspective, it's one plot. Like you said, it's, some aspects is a little harder. You've got a much more finite word count, so you really have to make sure that every word counts, every chapter is pulling its weight, that sort of thing. But overall, I find it's less daunting of an approach than, say, your typical 120, 150,000 word fantasy book.
I've been working a lot with novella or like short novel length the past few years, which is a bit of a divergence for me because I normally am much more comfortable with longer stuff where I can just kind of go and go and go and extrapolate the story. But this is beneficial in other ways because now I have an idea and I can have a first draft finished in 6 weeks or something like that. And okay, there's still a lot of editing and refining and trying to make every word count, as you say, but it's less daunting in a way because I don't need to like start with the idea and then know in the back of my head it's going to be 2 years before anyone sees this. It's the end point is much nearer in time.
Yeah, that's something that I've been really enjoying about these novella length works as well, is the much faster turnaround time. Like you said, I can have a rough draft done in, a couple of months, maybe, depending on how much time I have to work on it. And, obviously then there's beta reading and editing and all of that fun stuff that comes into writing a story. But, in the last year, I've been able to get now on my third book out, and if I was doing full length books, it'd be one a year at most. So it's nice being able to get more stories out in a quicker amount of time for people.
And as I always tell people, like when you get the printed book and you hold it in your hands and you can see it with all the chapter headings in the right position and everything, that is one of the best feelings as an author, is to see that, to know that all your hard work has actually amounted to something. So to get that in a shorter period of time, to get, as you say, like 2, 3 works in a year, you're building more experience and more of a sort of confidence in yourself that this is something you can do, rather than working for a year and a half, 2 years, just to see that and to see that you're actually able to make it in a way.
And it's nice that, honestly, getting that dopamine hit more often too. Like you said, opening the box with the fresh printed copies inside. When I opened it for my first book, I obviously was beyond excited to hold them in my hands, and I remember thinking like, "Oh, it's probably not gonna be as exciting every time as it was the first time," but so far it hasn't worn off. It's still just as exciting every other time.
Yeah, for me it is as well. It's maybe it's not, there's a certain level of excitement that on the first one is because, oh, this, I actually could do it. On future books I know I can do it, but it's still the dopamine hit of like, wow, look at this.
Yeah, definitely, being able to look at it's like, "Look at that, I finished another one. I've got another one out there for people to hopefully enjoy."
Yeah. Um Getting back into book one, it's called The Reluctant Blade, by the way. Um you're kind of playing around with class a little bit here. So Serenia is kind of raised in like a nobleman's household as like an adoptive child there, but then she winds up, for reasons we maybe should leave undespoiled for people, but she winds up kind of out on the street, penniless, and seeing sort of the other side of society out there. What were you trying to say playing around with different class structures like that?
So, to be perfectly honest, that plot almost came around by mistake in a way. I definitely wanted some element of, the lower class versus the upper class, but I remember when I got it back from my data readers, a lot of them pointed out the the themes of like class struggle and poor versus rich, um, in much more of a way than I had intended it to be. So then in future drafts, I lean into it more, and I really want to just highlight sort of the the different worlds that people can live in. Like someone who has millions and millions of dollars is obviously living in a very different world than someone who's struggling to make ends meet, even though they might pass each other on the street from time to time. Their perceptions are just so wildly different, and you really can't understand any like the other perspective unless you've been in it.
Yeah, it's interesting that sometimes as an author you don't see the themes that are right in front of you, or you don't realize the import that you're putting into them because it's just seeped its way into your brain for some reason, and it's not until your readers point it out that you're like, oh wait, I did do that.
Yeah, there's definitely something subconscious going on when I wrote it. Some part of me knew that I wanted to do that, but I just hadn't sort of consciously noticed I was doing it until it was pointed out, and I sort of had that moment of, oh yeah, I did do that. That is a good theme to focus on.
For sure, for sure. So moving a little further into it, you've got Serenia kind of out of the upper class world, and now she, maybe keep things a little vague, but she meets up with this group of like sort of secret society of pickpockets. And then they maybe get into some bigger things later on. That was a really fun element to the novel there. I like the sort of the criminal world coming together with kind of organization, kind of class justice. Was that something you put in there from the beginning, or was that something refined with your beta readers?
That was something that was there basically from the beginning. Serenia and the group that she falls into, the Sparrows, they were sort of one of the first things that I had figured out. They were kind of what I built the story around, and that their sort of bond and their drive and their ambitions were what I really wanted to kind of focus on with this story as I built it.
Would you consider this to be like a young adult book?
It so I've had some people that have read it and definitely, gotten back to me that they see it that way. I don't know that I intended for it when I wrote it, but I think having a younger POV character sort of almost by definition puts you into the young adult category. I've heard new adult tossed around as well, but I know that's not really a genre that's being marketed anymore. At least as far as I can tell, that's kind of a forgotten market at this point. But I think somewhere between young adult and new adult is where I would put it.
That's interesting that you haven't seen it marketed much anymore. I've had this discussion with a few other authors as to where exactly the line is between young adult and new adult, and we've always seen new adult as like up and coming, as like a new thing that is being further nicheified, if that makes sense. But maybe it's in the other direction, and it's sort of falling away.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it could be that it's still up and coming too, and maybe I just haven't seen much of it because it's still struggling to sort of find its place. Young adult is such a big category now, like such a not just in the amount of books that are coming out for it, but also just in popularity. I think it kind of dwarfs the other similar genres in a way.
Yeah, that's true. We've other guests and I have discussed, and we generally might class something as new adult, but then in all the marketing materials we'll kind of lean into the young adult because that's a genre that people understand, and that is one that was going to get you more traction anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing too, is when people come up to me at a market or at an event and I say new adult, 9 times out of 10, I get that look of, I don't know what you're talking about. You need to put this in words that I know. So then I kind of go, okay, well, kind of young adultish in that sense.
Yeah, how is the market situation going for you? We kind of met at a market down in Trenton, I believe, and just how is that working out for you?
So far, so good, honestly. It's been a lot better than I thought it was going to be going into it. I thought it would take me a lot longer to build up steam. And, I'm not a flyaway success by any means, but, I've at least, you know, done okay for myself at most of the markets I've gone to, and it's really also just fun getting to meet people and see the people that are buying your books and talk to them about it.
Yeah, there's most of the sales you have online, the people will never contact you, they'll never DM you or leave a review or anything. It's just you see like the plus column on your dividend statement, and you don't know what happens with that. It's really fun to meet people face to face, and they're really excited to read it. You describe the book and their face just lights up. Or especially if you get a returning customer who saw you at a previous show and like, I read this one, now I want this one.
Yeah, I've had a couple people come up to me now and come up to my table and say, "Where's book two? You told me book two was coming." I'm like, I'm working on it, I promise. I'm very glad you're excited about it, but just give me a few more days."
Yeah. Speaking of book two, so the Reluctant Blade is leading into a wider series here. I guess first off, did you know from the beginning how long the series is going to be, or is that kind of flying by the seat of your pants as well?
So in the beginning, I actually intended it to be a standalone. And then same kind of idea. I had some beta readers look at it and they all sort of pointed out that, you left it kind of open. There's a lot more you can do here. So I realized, you know what, there is more that I can do, and I would love to keep working with these characters. So that was when I resolved to make it a trilogy because I felt like that was enough books that I could completely tell the story and have it wrap up in a as nice of a way as it can. At least make sure there's not any loose ends dangling around. So basically, as soon as I decided to expand it, I knew it was going to end up being 3 books. That just felt like the right number to me to tell the story.
It's a good idea, in my opinion, anyway, to have sort of a set endpoint so you know. I guess you're not going off the rails with it. You kind of know what you're building to, and you know how each book is going to progress.
Yeah, I've definitely read some series where you can tell that the author didn't know how many books it was going to be. Um, and you get to that point sort of in the middle of the series when you start getting like book, 5 and 6 and 7, where you go, okay, we're starting to meander a little bit. We could get back on track a bit here. And that was something I definitely wanted to avoid. And I find having a set, this is as many books as I get. These are all the pages I have. It makes it easier to go, okay, this isn't helping and it's taking up too much space, so we're cutting that.
Yeah, I've read some of those same series too, and they're great in the beginning, and then they almost start repeating themselves too. It's like, didn't you just do this storyline in a different setting 2 books ago?
Yep.
Yeah, we might even be thinking about the same series here. For books 2 and 3, and we should mention for the audience that book 2 is going to be coming out like next week. It's August 14th, correct?
Correct.
For books 2 and 3, are they going to be like the same sort of novella length, or are they going to build out to be a little bit more fleshed out?
Yeah, the book two is the same length. Might be, a few thousand words longer, I think, but overall, still novella length. Book three, the plan is to keep it novella length, but I know how these things can sometimes get away from you, and you don't always get a say in that. So we'll see if I ends up needing a, couple tens or 20,000 more words to tell the whole story. I might end up having to push to light novel length, but the goal is to keep them all as novellas.
Yeah, I was talking with Daryl J. Ball a few weeks ago. He was episode 89, and he was in kind of a similar situation. He just finished his 7 book fantasy series, which he knew was going to be 7 books from the beginning, and or at least as much as he planned that far ahead. But he said that, yeah, they're all kind of novella length as well, except for the last one, which kind of became almost double that because he needed to finish up so many subplots.
Oh yeah, true. Especially with a longer series like that, I feel like there'd be so much more to wrap up and more characters to make sure that they get the ending they deserve.
Yeah, it's even when I get to like just the end of a normal length novel, I, there's always storylines that get sort of left to the side because real life is messy and not everything comes to a neat little bow on it at the end as well. So sometimes just characters disappear, or the end of their story is inferred through the last time you saw them 3 chapters before. But I always feel that urge to be like, have a little like postscript in there to be like, oh, and this character wound up here, and this character wound up there, and the result of this was this. But sometimes I have to pull myself back from that.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the in Lord of the Rings, where at the end you get the appendices or whatever they were, where it shows where each character ended up and what they did and how much longer they lived for. And I would love to do that, but you get to the point where that would almost be a book on its own, just explaining where everyone went, and it's too much.
Yeah, and it's like there's an issue of pacing as well, where you want the novel to like maintain a certain pace to its climax and not have a full other novel behind it, just with the denouement filling everything out.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever finished a mystery novel that left your brain in a pretzel and immediately wanted to talk about the ending with someone else? Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Jerry Marchioni, author of The Utopia, and I'm excited to tell you about my latest novel. If you're like me and you enjoy compelling characters, twists you won't see coming, and mysteries that keep you guessing until the very last page, I'd love for you to check out my mystery crime thriller, Who Killed Arnold Muller? Join journalist Natalie Flint as she dives deep into the decade-old murder that once rocked her hometown to its core. Experience the investigation through her eyes as she interviews those closest to the case, including Tracy Kolsky, the imprisoned killer who has never wavered in proclaiming her innocence. Along the way, Natalie uncovers Longberry's secrets about that fateful night, some of which may hit far closer to home than she ever imagined. Who Killed Arnold Muller is a fast-paced mystery filled with suspense, family secrets, and moral dilemmas, all centered around one unsettling question. What happens when the truth is more dangerous than the lie? Who Killed Arnold Muller is available now on Amazon, and you'll find a link to order your copy in this episode's show notes. If you'd like to learn more about me, my books, or just connect, you can find me on Instagram at Christian Jerry Marchioni, where I share behind-the-scenes looks at my writing process, book updates, and news about future projects. Thanks so much for listening. Happy reading.
Okay, tell me a little bit about your writing process. You mentioned that you are more of a pantser than a plotter. I guess how long have you been writing for, and how many ideas did you go through before you settled on this Reluctant Blade?
So I've been writing as a hobby for, I want to say 15 years, maybe a little longer than that. I started in high school. A friend of mine and we used to always come up with story ideas, and one day I just kind of decided to start putting pen to paper on them. And I've only been doing it as a hopeful career for maybe a couple years, I think, has been the amount of time where I've been really taking it seriously and trying to do something with it. So I've gone through a lot of ideas in that time. Some of them I wrote part way. Some of them I have rough drafts that are just kind of on the back burner waiting for me to go back to them. Others I never did anything with. They were just kind of a fleeting, just this could be fun one day, and then I move on the next day. Um, but when it came to ideas that I was actually really passionate, really excited about writing, this one was pretty early on. There was only a couple other stories that I attempted before I landed on this one.
Sometimes like you will trot around in the mud a little bit, being like, oh, I could do something with this idea, I could do something with that idea, and it always falls by the wayside, or you hit some snag that derails you a little bit, and then the right idea just comes to you almost fully formed, or at least fully formed enough that you can just kind of launch into it, and that's the one that you wind up finishing.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what happened with this one. I was just kind of at work, and I would often come up with story ideas to fill the sort of quieter periods of my shift. And I came up with a character, and then a few more characters, and a setting. And within a week, I had a rough idea of a plot and a setting and everything, and I was able to just kind of sit down and start working on it.
Yeah, I'm sure I've mentioned this before in a previous episode, but my novel Rain's Agenda was kind of the same way, where I was like working on other things at the time I was trying to kind of include everything, including the kitchen sink, into this other idea that was becoming bigger than it could contain itself. And then just Rain's Agenda came to me one day, and I basically wrote it in like 3 months. And it was like again, kind of straight A to B. It is novel length, but it's a little bit of a shorter novel, and it just right to the end, and there it is. It's a fully formed idea without all this extra clutter, junking it up.
And it always feels good when you have those moments too, where you're able to almost see clearly for the first time in a while, and you're like, you know what, I know what the story is. I know where I want it to go. I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna make it, and I'm gonna be done.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily plan on just having it be done so soon, but it was again, the story kind of came to me mostly fully formed, and I started writing, and I still have the fun of like discovering the little scenes in between that I didn't plan for. But it's nice to have that sort of endpoint and the general flow and direction as you're going, so you're not kind of lost out in the wilderness somewhere.
Yeah, and to your point of finding the fun moments along the way, that's one of the things I really enjoy about not planning everything ahead of time, is that I get those moments where I get halfway through the story and I realize, oh, you know what, this would be a really good scene right here, or this would be a really great way to combine these two plot points. And I get that moment of sort of that spark of imagination or creativity, and I get to almost that excitement of discovering something within the story.
I know exactly what you mean there. You can't always see that from like the 30,000 foot view. So like planning it all out scene by scene, as I know some authors do, I don't know where the fun is in that. Like, even if I try to do that, I'm gonna discover things along the way. I'm gonna have one character say something that's a little clever turn of phrase to another, but it's gonna set the story on a slightly different course and then change the next two chapters before I can get back on track. And so I kind of just I like to have my ending, but then otherwise I just like to let it flow where it's gonna go.
And sometimes it's really that simple, right? Like, it's just one bit of dialogue or one scene description where you go, "Oh, hey, wait a minute. Like, there's more here. There's something else I can do with this. Let's explore that for a little bit before we get back to what we were doing."
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned earlier that a first draft can take you a couple months on these like novella length ones. How does the first draft look when you're done? Like, does it require a lot of editing? Is it mostly in its finished form? I know you use beta readers after that, but sort of what does your editing process look like once you finish the first draft?
So the first draft that I write, sort of my rough draft, is a mess, and I don't let anybody read that. Because since I am more of an on the fly writer, if I get, 4 or 5 chapters in and think, oh, you know what, it would be better if this
Mhm.
character were present, if they were on this leg of the journey, I'll just continue writing as if they'd been there the whole time.
Mhm.
Or, if I get to a point where, oh, I killed this character off, but I think it'd be better if they lived and this character died instead, I'll just pick up as if they had been alive the whole time and I won't go back and edit. Once I have that done, then I'll go back, I'll tie everything up, I'll make it all make sense and make the continuity proper again. And then generally after that, in my opinion, it's ready to get some eyes on it. And so I've got a few friends that are pretty consistently my beta readers. I'll send it off to them, and they'll more often than not send me multi-page analyses on every aspect of the story, and they'll leave comments on the document of things that make sense and don't, and what can change. And then I end up with a lot of editing that usually takes me uh, quite a few days to get through it all, sometimes more if I need to rewrite the whole story from scratch, as has happened in the past.
My first draft is always a real mess. I'm getting slightly better at it, but it's still a mess. Where I do the exact same thing, whereas I'll decide, oh yeah, I want this other character in there, or I need a character because they're going to fulfill this future part of the story, but I can't just have them plucked out of nowhere. They have to appear earlier. And sometimes I'm able to go back and kind of sneak them in just from memory and say, well, I know here's a spot they could be, and here's a spot they could be. Sometimes I'll just start on like chapter 15, asterisk, insert this character in previous chapters, or something of that nature. And then I just have to be to catch it on the next draft where I have to read through and be like, oh, yes, I guess I could have done this here and here and here. And sometimes that's a little disheartening where if you look at the notes, the handwritten notes I have at the end of my read of the first draft, it looks like, it's an insurmountable uphill battle. But I get through it, and then I get to the second draft, and it's just like 90% of that is taken care of, and it's just little edits here or there, like little typos.
Yeah, there's definitely been moments where, I've gotten the feedback and I've gone through it and I've gone, oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm going to implement this, but they're right. And I'll get to a scene and I'll go, okay, I know it needs to change. And I know what it needs to change too, but I don't know how to do it. And sometimes it's a couple days of just staring at a half-finished Word document and thinking like, how do I do this? How do I fix this problem? And then, eventually it comes to you, or you power through it and you figure it out. And y- I know every time that I'm going to end up with a stronger book in the end, but when you're in that moment, it's sometimes hard to see that, and you're just focused on, oh my God, this is going to take me forever. What do I even bother? Like, well, what's the point of uh, finishing it if there's so much I need to fix? And then, like I said, you power through it and you realize how worth it was.
This is something I tell like more junior authors all the time, is that sometimes you write something and maybe you get notes on it. You have friends, you have beta readers say something about it, and your inclination is to say, no, you don't understand it, or no, I wouldn't be able to make that work. Sit on it for a little bit, especially take the draft you have, set it down, write something else for a couple of months, come back to it with fresh eyes, and you will see the mistakes, you'll see the pacing errors, you'll see the just little continuity errors along the way much clearer, because you're not so deeply enmeshed in it, and you won't have the the talons wrapped into it where you have to hold on every little thing. You will be able to make the tough choices to say, no, they were right, this needs to go, and I will jettison this subplot in favor of changing it to this. It's Yes, it adds more time before you can publish it, but it does make for a better product in the end, because you're less hooked into wanting it to be exactly what it was in the first draft.
And sometimes, you'll sit on it or you'll put it aside for a bit and you'll come back to it and you realize that, maybe they were wrong. Maybe they didn't understand the scene that you were going for, the atmosphere that you wanted. But you can't just dismiss it out of hand either, right? Like you need to give every opinion its fair chance. And sometimes people are going to give feedback that doesn't fit or that you don't need to act on. But I feel like 9 times out of 10, they know what they're talking about. And even if, maybe their proposed change isn't the way to do it, the thing that they're saying needs to change still needs to change in some way.
Yeah, as a general rule of thumb is, if you get the same criticism back from more than one person, that's something you really got to pay attention to. If it's just one person saying it, maybe it's a valid point that they're making. Maybe they're not the right person to read this one. It's not their genre. They zoned out and missed a critical bit of information earlier, or something of that nature. And, you can take that with a grain of salt. But if you're getting the same criticism again and again, that's something you really got to pay attention to.
Yeah, and it's something too where you can always ask the other people giving you feedback as well. There was a point editing book two. I won't say what scene it is, so I won't spoil anything. But there was a specific scene where one of my beta readers that had read it had told me like this scene needs to be cut. It's not helping you. So I so and so says that it should be cut. That a lot. All of them came back with, no, you need to keep this scene. It's one of the better scenes in the book. Like this needs to stay. And so, that was one of those cases, like you said, where they just didn't, maybe the story wasn't for them. That wasn't the kind of scene that they enjoyed, or they just didn't realize the sort of necessity of the scene or the impact of the scene. But, like you said, if you get multiple people all saying the same thing, chances are they're right and they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and on the note of, you pass it off to a beta reader, but maybe it's not their story, it's not the story that's meant for them, and they're not going to give the best feedback. That is a challenge that sometimes we indie authors have to deal with, is finding beta readers who are sort of in our genre, in our niche, that are going to get what we're trying to do and appreciate it, versus your average just Joe Blow off the street who might not be into the genre. You mentioned you have a few friends that have kind of become your dedicated beta readers. Do you stick with them? Do you put out calls to other fans to say, hey, you read book one, I'm seeking beta readers for book two? How do you approach that?
So I've recently putting up a bit more. I still kind of default to my same friends because I know that they've got good opinions. We tend to agree on a lot of things, so I generally feel pretty confident that if they don't like a scene, it's for a good reason. But recently, I've started opening it up a bit more. I joined a writing community on Discord a while back, and I've posted a lot of my shorter fiction on there to get feedback, and I found some people through that are really great at giving feedback and very concise. And there's a few other people that I've reached out to and that maybe aren't writers themselves, but they're avid readers, and in a way that's almost better. And I've reached out to them and said, hey, you read my first book. Would you have any interest in reading book two? And just kind of letting me know what you think of it. But I haven't really put it out too far just yet. I know some people that do almost like public calls for beta readers in a way where they'll kind of post it on their socials and you can sign up. I haven't gone to that point. I'm still keeping it within people that I know personally, but it's definitely something to consider, something that I've considered with future books that might be worth it just to get more eyes on it. The more feedback you can get, the better.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a good way too of breaking outside of the group of people that have already been with you the whole way, is if you get just sort of a random person who happens to have come across on social media, you're getting a fresh perspective that wasn't there earlier on. Maybe that's an opinion you have to discount if they come back with a lot of really weird notes that you weren't expecting, or maybe that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, you never know, like you said, you get a fresh perspective and maybe they'll see something that other people overlooked, either because they're just used to your style, or sometimes if it's friends, you've talked to them about the story outside of them reading it, so they know the context of a scene, whereas, some random person isn't going to know the context, and they'll be able to point out like, hey, I don't understand why this is happening. You need to clarify this a bit more for me.
When you mentioned earlier that this wasn't planned to be a trilogy originally, it was just going to be a standalone and a novella length standalone at that. How do you approach world building? Like, did you have the world fully formed once you kind of realized it was going to be sort of Italian Renaissance period? Or did it evolve with that, like beyond that, into different noble houses that you weren't expecting, or different cities, or you know, aspects of the landscape, or what have you?
So my approach to world building is very much, I don't know if you've seen videos of when they take like a first person video game and they zoom it out and you can see that it's only rendering the part of the world that's on screen. That's kind of my approach. I plan out anything that's going to be in the plot and relevant, and beyond that, there's admittedly not a whole lot of world building because I'm not going to build, all these different aspects that no one's ever going to see. I'd rather put more depth into the things you are going to see. And a lot of it is, like I said, made up on the fly. I've got a drawing of a map that I consult, and every once in a while I think, oh, you know what? It would make sense if there was like some mountains here. So I'll draw those into the map so I remember that they're there for future stories or what have you. But a lot of it is very much as I come to it, I'll I kind of build it out as much as I need it to be, or as much as I feel like is correct in a way. And then I move to the next aspect of the world as I get to it.
If you can make that work, that's a good way of doing it, because it gives you the freedom to, explore, especially if you're adding books two and three, which you hadn't planned on. When it came to books two and working into book three, is there anything you've discovered about your world building that is like, well, I can add this here, and luckily it doesn't contradict anything from earlier?
Nothing too crazy yet. Thankfully, these books are contained to a pretty small area. Book one happens mainly in one city, and the rest of the trilogy continues that. There's little bits and pieces that take place outside the city, but for the most part, it's all contained in this one area. So that also makes it easier too, as I have a smaller area to work with. So I don't have to worry about, oh, they're crossing a river. This river has to lead somewhere, or they're going through these woods. It doesn't make sense for there to be a forest here. It's just, here's the streets, here's the buildings. There's, water on this side of the city. There's land on this side. There's your, there's your map. There's what you got to work with.
Yeah, like I say, that's a good approach, especially with following like one or a small cast of characters. You don't really need this giant extended map that ties everyone together.
Yeah, like I've got another more full-length novel that I've been working on here and there as I get stuck on this trilogy. I'll sometimes take a day or two to work on that one. And that one's much more expansive. And that one's got a lot more world building going into it because, I've got multiple POVs and I need to make sure travel times are making sense and views and various vistas that are described are lining up properly. So that one's, a lot more thought is going into the world building and a lot more detail is going into it. But thankfully, with the trilogy, confining myself to one city minimizes a lot of that stress.
For sure. Now we've teased this a little bit already, but if the listener is listening to this on the day of release, that's August 6th, and next week you have book 2 coming out. Do you want to set that up for the listener to say sort of where we left off on book 1 and what they can expect going into the early bits of book 2?
Yeah, so book 1, you know, I'll try to be vague about spoilers if I can, just in case. But Serenia left off making a pretty major life decision, and so book 2 picks up a year later. So she's been living this life she's chosen for herself for quite a while now, and she's starting to sort of come to terms maybe with the consequences of her choice. But throughout book 2, we see that there's a lot more unintended consequences. There's downsides and negatives that she didn't realize when she first signed up. And she starts to kind of question herself a lot more. Question her morals, question sort of, is she doing, is she on the side? It's a lot of a dive into, can she reconcile with herself the choices that she's made and the choices she's continuing to make?
And do you have anything planned for like a big personal bash or a release or anything for the book 2?
Not really. No, I've got a few events planned that will be vaguely around the time. There's nothing going on that weekend. I'm probably just gonna have a small little release party with friends and family or something, have a drink to celebrate, that kind of thing. But I've got a couple markets coming up as at the time of recording this in a few weeks, and a couple markets coming up at the time of release in a couple weeks. So hopefully I'll have plenty of copies available at all of those markets for people to come by and check out.
Yeah, so if you are at any of those markets, if you, the listener, are there, feel free to go by, check it out. Check out this exciting series that he's got building. Do you have a rough timeline for book 3, or is that way too much in the wind at this point?
My goal that I've been saying for people is by the end of the year. I don't know if that's going to be feasible. I know that I can have a draft written, but long before then. I've already started working on it, but it depends on how long it takes for beta readers to get back to me. It depends when my editor is available to go through it. There's a lot of factors out of my control. So it may end up not being until beginning of next year, but hopefully I want to have it out by the end of the year if everything goes as planned.
All right, just on a fun note, some of your favorite fantasy authors?
So I feel like, Sanderson's probably one of the obvious ones. I think a lot of just about any fantasy author nowadays is going to mention him. I've really been becoming a fan of James Islington lately. I read his Lycanius trilogy and I loved it. I've been really enjoying the Hierarchy series that he's been coming out with. I recently finished Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and that made me a big fan of Susanna Clarke. She's great. That book was incredible. Those are kind of the main ones. And I've been reading a lot of Dungeon Crawler Carl lately as well. I think that's another one that just about everyone has been talking about lately, but for good reason. It's a very fun series.
All right, GerritVan Eck, where can people find you?
So the number one place is obviously my website, GerritVanEck.com. It's got an events page. So if you're ever wondering if I'm going to be in your area, if you want to come pick up a book, get it signed, that's the best place to check out. I try to keep it as up to date as possible with everywhere I'm going to be popping up. Otherwise, I'm on, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, pretty much every social media you can think of. I'm just Gerrit_Van Eck at pretty well all of them, I believe. I'm not super active. I'm not a good social media user, but I try to post when I think about it. Try to keep people as up to date as I can.
All right. Well, GerritVan Eck, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First, there was Attila, who savaged Rome and committed genocide from Asia Minor to Gaul. He was a Mongol who wandered in from the Far East and took up the sword for gold, girls, and glory. Then came Genghis, the founder of the nation, who surged outwards from the steppe and wreaked annihilation across 2 continents. He was a Mongol who made graveyards of China and the Middle East and left his seed in half the women of Eurasia. Then came Tamerlane, who swirled out of Samarkand like a whirlwind, leaving towers of human skulls and a tidal wave of blood enough to drown an army and their horses. He was a Mongol who butchered from India to the shores of Europe and terrified the Middle East for half a millennium with his curse. Then came Harajan, who, on the crest of a global energy crisis and economic collapse, raised his scimitar like a standard and charged his horses outwards from Mongolia to usher in the new world epoch. This is the premise of my 1,300-page post-apocalyptic epic, The Hounds of Harajan. Do you like epic world-building? Do you like dozens of POV characters whose journeys intersect after a long build-up? Do you like dark post-apocalyptic with hints of soft magic fantasy? Do you like court intrigue and feuding royal houses? The Hounds of Harajan is 140 chapters of sword fights, naval battles, desert banditry, scheming concubines, and a dire shamanic prophecy that threatens the entire world order. The paperback is available in 2 volumes, and the ebook has 1 giant omnibus, with the audiobook coming soon. Note, coming soon refers to some time prior to the heat death of the universe. The first 2.5 hours of the audiobook is previewed on episode 27 of this podcast. See JasonShannon.com/The Hounds of Harajan for details. Thanks to Gerrit for coming on the podcast. Once again, Book 2, The Dulled Edge, comes out August 14th. You can go and pre-order that now. I've got a really big show coming up. This is the August 14th weekend. I will be in Nipigon, which is Northern Ontario. I've never been to Nipigon before, and this is a Blueberry Blast Festival where I will also be vending with my books. If you are in anywhere near Nipigon, I encourage you to come out, check out my stuff. Maybe I can give you some special deals. This is an all-weekend show, and I'm going to be making a bit of a vacation out of it. Later in the year, I will be having the Cogs and Clockwork Steampunk Festival in Fergus, Ontario. That is September 12th. And I will be at CanCon this year in Ottawa in October. To stay up to date on all my events, you can go to www.jasonshannon.com/events. All the times and addresses will be listed there. Coming up on the podcast, we're going to be talking to romance author Meg Lush. We're going to have R.W. Duder back on. We're continuing with his Amy series, and we're discussing Book 2, Amy Legacy. But next week, we've got Christian Jerry Marchioni coming back on to discuss his book, Who Killed Arnold Muller, which is just an absolutely fascinating murder mystery. So stay tuned for that. All right, until then, cheers, everyone.